On this Monday night, a step forward for the Trans Mountain Pipeline. The project has divided provinces, political fortunes, and people across the country. But now, CBC News has learned an agreement has been reached that should see the pipeline built.
Also tonight, 2 Canadian banks targeted by hackers. Our bank accounts are among our most private and supposedly secure information. So how was the data breached?
And the hometown hockey hero who has PEI cheering for Vegas. This is The National.
The deadline is looming. In just 3 days, Kinder Morgan said it would pull the plug on the Trans Mountain Pipeline project unless it had a clear path forward. But now, CBC News has learned that tomorrow morning, Finance Minister Bill Morneau is planning to announce a deal. David Cochran is breaking this story for us tonight. So, David, what more do we know about what the Finance Minister is planning to say?
Well, Andrew, what we can tell you tonight is that Finance Minister Bill Morneau has reached an agreement in principle with Kinder Morgan on the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. And a senior federal official says the agreement will allow the pipeline expansion to go ahead this summer and save those associated construction jobs. And right now, tonight, lawyers and officials from both sides are still hammering out the final language and the paperwork of this agreement. And of course, until that is done, this is still just an agreement in principle. But this is how the senior official describes what's on the table. What Morneau has negotiated will enable us to now go and get the pipeline built. It's the beginning of getting it built. Now, just what that means specifically is still a closely guarded secret here in Ottawa. Kinder Morgan is a publicly traded company, and all of these pipeline discussions have been happening subject to a non-disclosure agreement. And because of that, the senior official I spoke with would not specify what Morneau and the company had landed on. But there are 3 options on the table. We know that Morneau has already announced that the federal government is willing to compensate Kinder Morgan for any financial loss caused by British Columbia's attempts to obstruct the pipeline. That's option 1. Option 2 is that Ottawa could buy, build, and then sell the pipeline once the work is complete. And the third option is that it could buy it from Kinder Morgan right now and then put it on the market for investors willing to pick up the project and then build it themselves. Well, the plan, as of tonight, is for Bill Morneau to make this public tomorrow, make an announcement tomorrow after the federal cabinet meets at 7:30 in the morning, but sometime before the stock markets open.
Right, but as you say, critical details still to come. And I think of, Kinder Morgan's deadline still being a couple of days away on Thursday. Why announce this tomorrow?
Well, they want to clear the decks. They've got some important, Morneau and the Prime Minister, this will allow them to speak to key business audiences this week to give clearer answers on what's going to happen with the pipeline. Tomorrow afternoon, Trudeau is in Toronto taking part in a Bloomberg business function where he wants to talk about growing the economy. Later in the day, Morneau and the Prime Minister are going to sit down with a roundtable of business leaders. And then Morneau goes west. On Wednesday, he's in Calgary speaking to the Chamber of Commerce. On Thursday, he's in British Columbia, in Whistler, to chair a meeting of the G7 finance ministers and central bankers. So they wanted to get the decks cleared and get all of this locked down before the events of this week rolled out. And if the lawyers don't hit a snag tonight, Andrew, it should all be wrapped up by tomorrow morning.
All right, David Cochran breaking the story for us tonight. Thanks so much. Now let's break down exactly what is on the table here. Kinder Morgan wants to expand the existing 60-year-old Trans Mountain Pipeline from just outside Edmonton to the Vancouver area. It's a $7 billion project that would ultimately allow Alberta to sell more oil to Asian markets. But that means more tanker traffic on the West Coast. Hence, the bitter fight between the Alberta and BC governments. 2 NDP premiers with dramatically different ideas about the right way forward, but both willing to put trade and their economies on the line to get their way.
All Canadians should understand that if the path forward for the pipeline through BC is not settled soon, I am ready and prepared to turn off the taps.
Alberta passed legislation that would allow the province to restrict oil and gas shipments to BC. That could wreak havoc on the BC economy and could cause already high gas prices in that province to spike. Rachel Notley has to aggressively defend the pipeline project. Thousands of jobs there depend on the oil sands. And John Horgan is fighting back.
We believe that we have been on a course all along to defend the interests of British Columbians, which is what we set out to do when we were sworn in as a government last July.
The BC NDP vowed in the provincial election last year to stop the Kinder Morgan pipeline project.
I don't work for Kinder Morgan. I work for the people of British Columbia.
And keep in mind, the NDP is clinging to power with the help of the Green Party, which also opposes the pipeline. And another reason Horgan isn't compromising. So with all that at stake, plus news tonight that an agreement's been reached, what could still stand in the way of construction? Well, the courts, for one. Most notably, John Horgan has asked BC's highest court to decide if his government has the right to bring in stricter rules for oil moving through the province. And at the same time, several First Nations and environmental groups want the federal court to decide if the National Energy Board fulfilled its legal obligation to adequately consult them. Now, throughout the entire dispute, we've also seen protesters trying to intervene directly. Probably among the most high-profile among them, federal Green Party leader Elizabeth May. She was arrested at a pipeline protest about 2 months ago, released later that same day. And now, after her day in court, she's pleaded guilty to criminal contempt.
I believe that I was acting under a sense of moral duty. That's been made clear in the court today. The judge says that's no excuse, and he's right. In law, it's no excuse to say I felt a higher moral calling.
Now, of course, protesting itself is not illegal, but a court injunction was in effect last March, preventing protesters from getting too close. Elizabeth May broke that injunction when she and an NDP MP, Kennedy Stewart, helped block a road at Kinder Morgan's Burnaby Mountain facility. May has been ordered to pay a $1,500 fine. Stewart will pay $500.
Here's what else we're working on tonight on The National. He was forced out of the party leadership just months before the election. Tonight, Patrick Brown tells us what he thinks about the new direction of the Ontario PC Party.
Plus, his heroism was lost to history until one woman made it her mission to tell his story. In tonight's national documentary, the Swiss diplomat who saved children from the Nazis and the Canadians who owe him their lives.
But first, two of Canada's major banks say tens of thousands of customers may have had their data hacked. And there is some concern that the institutions didn't alert those customers quickly enough. The Bank of Montreal says up to 50,000 customer accounts were breached. CIBC owns Simply Financial, previously known as PC Financial, says data from 40,000 of its customers was accessed. And it's unclear if the two breaches are connected. Aaron Saltzman is taking a closer look.
Outside this Bank of Montreal branch, reaction ranged from concern to anger.
I'm worried.
I work hard for my money, bro. That's it. I don't want to hear no sorry, no loss, no.
Both BMO and Simply Financial say they found out about the hack on Sunday. In a statement, Simply said, "We're taking this claim seriously and have taken action to further enhance our monitoring and security procedures." Simply wouldn't say who made the claim, but Bank of Montreal did. BMO told CBC News the hackers themselves alerted the bank, and a threat was made to make the breach public. Security experts say it was likely an extortion attempt.
They had access to a certain amount of data. They probably showed proof that they had this data, and most likely were trying to blackmail the banks, saying, we're going to release this or else.
Neither bank will say how the breach occurred, but cybercrime is a growing issue for financial institutions. Almost 70% of Canadians bank primarily online or through their mobile device. A recent report says technological innovations are increasing the amount of data at risk. Outsourcing can provide even more opportunity to cybercriminals.
Every organization uses vendors and service providers to do some of their business, right? So every single system in the world has vulnerabilities.
Some Simply Financial customers say fraudulent e-transfers were being sent from their accounts days before the bank said it learned of a security breach.
I want to know, where else I have to be concerned, right? Like, do I now need to be running credit checks to see if someone's trying to get a credit card in my name?
And that's the problem, because while banks say they'll compensate anyone who loses money because of this, once your date of birth, your home address, and other personal information is stolen, well, experts say there's really no way to fix that. Aaron Saltzman, CBC News, Toronto.
Okay, so we've decided to bring Aaron back in here because there's a late development on this story. What's happened?
Well, what's happened is we appear to have heard from the hackers themselves. So late tonight, an email was sent to a number of news organizations, including the CBC, purportedly from the hackers. It contains what appears to be a message that the hackers originally sent to BMO and Simply Financial. Now, I should say before we go on that we normally wouldn't broadcast threats. We take this type of thing very seriously. We wouldn't broadcast a bomb threat or any sort of thing like that. But in this case, we decided that the information is so much in the public interest. There are so many people out there who may be affected that we decided to go with this information. And what it tells us is that the hackers managed to explains how they managed to get through the bank's security apparatus to obtain the information, but more tellingly, it contains the demand for money. It says if you don't pay us $1 million in cryptocurrency, then we are going to release all of these names. And the banks clearly didn't do that and went public instead. So this email to the media also explains what the hackers are going to do. And if that stuff gets out, obviously that's a serious concern. Now, even more chillingly in here, there are several examples of some of the accounts that could be listed with real people, real names, real sins, real bank balances, even their security questions. And CBC's Go Public contacted one of the people on this list, and she told us that that information was all entirely accurate. So that's the reason why we're going with this now, because it appears that we have new information about this entire situation.
Okay, Aaron, thanks. I know you'll be staying on this.
You bet.
All right. So CIBC owns Simply Bank, but the issue seems to be confined to just Simply. Other CIBC customers aren't affected. We reached out to 3 other major banks, Royal Bank, TD, and Scotia. All of them say there's no indication their customers have been affected either. It is still unclear how serious this breach was, but of course, any breach of a bank's defenses triggers alarm. And worldwide, this happens more than you might think. Banks might have good cybersecurity, but they are also pretty tempting targets. In 2016, hackers pulled off a staggering heist of Bangladesh's central bank, routing $100 million worth of funds from New York to a bank in the Philippines. Last month, 3 Mexican banks detected breaches of their electronic payment systems.
No podemos decir que ya haya terminado.
In that case, criminals siphoned nearly $20 million worth of pesos.
Just redirected somewhere else because there was a flaw in one of the software that authorized the bank transfers, and some people were able to get in and make that transfer possible.
Canadian banks haven't had a cyber heist like that, but they have been offering services like online and mobile banking that have added vulnerability to the system. The convenience just masks some basic risks.
Where do you connect with your smartphone? If you're going to an internet cafe and your Wi-Fi is activated, as an example, what are you connecting to? You have to assume that everything is a threat.
And of course, the dark web is brimming with stolen credit card and personal data from past hacks. The advice from cybersecurity experts is as constant as the threat.
Securing your passcode, making sure it's not something simple to guess from wherever social media presence you have, and afterwards securing your physical platform by not using necessarily that computer that lies in the hotel lobby or an internet cafe.
In short, don't rely on companies alone, not even banks, to protect you. Okay, so Ian, let's now turn to the Ontario election. Already a pretty unusual campaign, and it just took another twist.
And we are, of course, just days to go until the vote happens. And polls have suggested that the Progressive Conservative Party had a comfortable lead that has slowly disappeared. And now the former leader, Patrick Brown, ousted earlier this year amid allegations of sexual misconduct, is speaking publicly to our Hannah Thibodeau, choosing a critical time in this campaign to raise questions about the party that he led.
Imagine what Patrick Brown is thinking, looking at the set of the leaders' debate, an event he believes he, not Doug Ford, should have been in.
Campaigns, I think, matter. Campaigns test a politician.
In this case, it has certainly tested Ford. The PCs are trending downwards as this campaign rolls on.
You know, they have snatched defeat out of the jaws of victory before, but never with a lead this big, never with an advantage this big. You know, the PCs had a slight lead in previous elections and it evaporated, but never anything like this. And so I think progressive conservatives would be very disappointed and upset if this election ends up in a negative result.
Brown says he left the party in good standing, even though he was forced out under a cloud of controversy. Brown stepped down as leader in January when CTV News reported that 2 women were accusing him of sexual assault. Brown has denied the allegations. Ford won the subsequent leadership.
I'm not particularly close with Doug Ford. I'm more of a progressive conservative, and we share different perspectives. PCs have
Brown says he tried to soften the party's hard-line conservative image.
I was proud to be the only conservative leader in the country to speak against Islamophobia. I was proud to lead a conservative party that recognized climate change. There are conservatives I would suggest to replicate, and there's conservatives I'd suggest not to replicate.
You say not to replicate. Is there...
Well, I think some of the conservatism south of us in the United States wouldn't be a brand that I would suggest works in Ontario or is appropriate for Ontario.
Brown was careful not to directly criticize Ford. He danced around it, suggesting he doesn't want to destroy the party. Observers say it's very unusual for a former leader to attack a current one at such a critical time in a campaign. But Brown says he's coming forward now after Ford repeatedly blamed him for some controversies regarding several candidates.
And this goes back again, my friends, to Patrick Brown. Inherited this mess from Patrick Brown. I'm going to clean this mess up. We should be interviewing Patrick Brown.
You know, I take exception with that comment, and you know, Doug may not have wanted to say talk to Patrick Brown because the facts tell a very different story.
Brown wouldn't say if Ford's hands are clean in the nomination controversies.
I'm not going to make any backseat assessment of the current political debate.
Ford's camp refused to comment today, but a source close to the campaign says Patrick Brown is trying to rehab his image so he can run politically again in the near future. Brown didn't rule out trying to return to politics. Hannah Thibodeau, CBC News, Toronto.
And here's a sense of what the progressive conservatives are up against as we inch closer to Election Day next week. Right now, our CBC poll tracker suggests the PCs and NDP are running neck and neck in the popular vote, with the Liberals well back. Along to a political fight of a different kind in Ottawa, heating up again between two MPs over issues of race. Quebec Conservative Maxime Bernier tweeted this weekend at Ontario Liberals Selina Caesar-Chavannes. His words, "You think the world revolves around your skin color." Catherine Cullen has the reaction and the bigger conversation that it's prompted.
But he says, I don't see race, and people are cool with it. I don't understand that.
It seems there's little understanding or perhaps even respect between these two anymore. It dates back to the last budget, which included millions for anti-racism initiative.
Anti-black racism persists. Unconscious bias does exist, and inequality lingers.
Conservative Maxime Bernier responded in a tweet. I thought the ultimate goal of fighting discrimination was to create a colorblind society where everyone is treated the same, not to set some Canadians apart as being racialized. Liberal Selina Caesar-Chavannes told him that attitude contributes to racism, adding, please check your privilege and be quiet. She later admitted her comment was, quote, not cool. Things revved up again this week when Caesar-Chavannes was profiled by the Globe and Mail and mentioned Bernier. His privilege is that he doesn't have to ever know what it's like to live with color. You've never had to experience it, sweetheart, so check yourself, she was quoted as saying. Bernier replied, you think the world revolves around your skin color. My goal is to bring better policies to all Canadians. And by the way, I'm not your sweetheart.
I don't think everything revolves around my skin color. I think that there are race issues that we need to deal with. And again, for someone like Mr. Bernier to not see that is foolishness.
Bernier, though, avoided the cameras today.
I'd like to ask you about Mr. Bernier's exchange with
he's Max could speak for himself. No, I'm unaware of it. Haven't been following it.
And no conservative explicitly defended Bernier.
I just thought those comments were really unhelpful in both directions.
But what about the real issue at the heart of this debate, whether systemic racism exists in Canada? Conservatives we spoke with weren't convinced.
I don't believe in what you say about systematic racism. I don't believe in that in this country.
I think the majority of Canadians are inclusive, and most of us are from somewhere, and we have different colors, different religions, and we're comfortable with that.
And so both the political and personal disagreements about race persist. Catherine Cullen, CBC News, Ottawa.
Still ahead, he saved children from the Nazis. Meet the historian who is keeping his legacy alive in tonight's national documentary.
Plus, could Harry and Meghan honeymoon in Canada? We'll take you to Jasper to meet people buzzing about the royals.
And you might as well call them the PEI Golden Knights. Why the island is all in for Vegas's team in the Stanley Cup final.
It is an amazing hockey town. I coached in the Stanley Cup Finals 20 years ago, or 22 years ago with the Florida Panthers. It was like crazy then, and it's crazy now. So it's really exciting for Gerard, his family, and all the people in town.
Tonight on The National, we're tracking a developing situation in Stratford, Ontario. A bomb threat has forced organizers to cancel opening night of the Stratford Festival. 2 theaters were evacuated, and tonight's performance of Shakespeare's The Tempest was also canceled. As of just over an hour ago, police said they were still searching for suspicious packages. We're also keeping an eye tonight on several major wildfires burning in BC, especially because there's hot, windy weather in the forecast, and that could make the situation worse. What you're looking at here is the Tommy Lakes fire burning in a remote area north of Fort St. John. People living nearby have been ordered to leave their homes.
To the blue line, Carlson did well to hold the puck in. Now he's got a backhander and scores!
And the Washington Capitals tying it up to make it 3-3. They're up against the Vegas Golden Knights, who are in a place no rookie team has reached in about half a century, the Stanley Cup final.
Now, I feel like many of you in PEI are watching tonight with pride, a link between Canada's smallest province and hockey's playoff underdog. That is the sound of unbridled loyalty, not for the upstart team so much as the coach who has led them there. Gerard Gallant was born in Summerside. It's where he learned to play. And 22 years ago, another Islander, Doug MacLean, coached in the NHL final, and it turns out that's not their only connection.
I taught him in high school. He was in my class for a couple of years. I remember doing a little questionnaire with my students saying, what do you want to do when you finish school? And I remember Gerard putting down he wanted to be a postman. I said, I think you should focus on the hockey.
Good advice. Gallant made it to the NHL as a player and now, of course, behind the bench.
We're a sporting town, and Gerard Gallant is very, very, very popular.
Like many of his Vegas players, Gallant knows rejection. In his 3rd season coaching the Florida Panthers, he wasn't just fired on the road, he had to hail a cab to get home.
We talked a lot during that time when it was getting a little ugly in Florida, and the night he was fired, we actually talked.
All of which makes this year so much sweeter. Somehow coaching a first-year team to the finals and becoming the pride of Prince Edward Island.
He won with our local junior team. He won with St. John Sea Dogs, the Memorial Championship. He's proven that he's a winner, and he has a way with young players, and they've got a young team, not supposed to win, and that's why they're going to win.
Colin Miller winds up, fires, he scores!
Well, there's still lots of hockey to be played, but Doug MacLean is certain that no matter the outcome, Gallant is keeping a level head.
He's never got too caught up in all the glory that goes along with it. He just does his job. He's comfortable coaching, whether it's St. John, whether it was with the Islanders as an assistant, whether it was Columbus, or whether it was coaching Junior A in Summerside. So I don't think he gets too carried away with it, but he's having fun right now.
And so he was the person behind the rescue mission, but he hardly ever was in the spotlight. Most people to this day would not know about who Karl Lutz was.
Well, tens of thousands of Hungarian Jews owe their lives to a modest Swiss diplomat, including 2 Canadians who were helpless children just caught up in racial hatred during the Second World War. Karl Lutz is far from a household name, yet his enormous rescue mission surpasses the work of better-known heroes. Here's the CBC's Laura Lynch with the story of the man some call the Swiss Schindler.
By the time Jews were deported and eliminated from society, they were no longer considered human beings. This was a very, very dangerous time, very critical.
Charlotte Chalier, Holocaust historian, is about to recount a story about a person who changed her life, even though she never met him.
In this time, what he did was the righteous thing to do.
The story begins as Nazi forces close in on Budapest, Hungary in 1944, aided by Hungarian militias loyal to Adolf Hitler.
Within a very short time frame, Jews in the countryside were deported. Almost 440,000 people were deported straight to Auschwitz. The majority were killed upon arrival.
In Budapest, every day brought new threats, new terrors.
It was the most successful mass murder in the whole genocidal history of the Second World War. I mean, we were very close to being deported ourselves.
We were about to be marched to the Danube, to be shot in.
But one man who probably felt far more comfortable sitting behind a desk stepped out and into the middle of all the threats, all the terror. A man named Karl Lutz.
What makes me fascinated by his story that he was not cut out to be a hero. You know, he was not a risk taker. He was very shy, awkward. So
Chalier, a Swiss citizen now living in Victoria, was in Budapest 4 years ago when she spotted a memorial to a man named Karl Lutz, also Swiss. That began her quest.
Hardly anybody was aware of it, and I felt this can't be true. And the more I read about him, the more I felt we need to hear about him. What he did was on such a magnitude. I mean, he spearheaded, he led the biggest civilian rescue operation during the Second World War. So I felt I needed to do something.
Karl Lutz, a quiet Swiss diplomat, used his skills to maneuver through the fascist bureaucracy and craft a plan that was simple, clever, and audacious. A plan that would ultimately save tens of thousands of men, women, and children. The Nazis had surrounded Budapest by 1944, and in the city, a then 6-year-old Andrew Simon and his friends faced fear by making a game of it.
I and my friends used to play air raids. We'd stand on the balcony and watch the skies to see if there's any enemy planes, and then we'd scream air raid, because in buildings there would be a siren, and everybody had to quickly go down to the air raid shelters.
In that same year, in January, a 25-year-old mother gives birth to her first child, a boy, Gabor Mate. She is alone, her husband forced to work in a labor camp.
So my mother actually kept a diary. She talks about the difficulties, but she concentrates more on the joy in having a new baby. She was, like other Jews, in terrific fear, which I imbibed, really.
For Gabor and all of them, the risk of dying was real every day. They moved into the ghettos, eventually finding their way into Karl Lutz's grand plan. With those Jewish homes becoming increasingly unsafe, Lutz invented new ways to declare buildings off limits to Nazis and their supporters.
But he creatively invented a system that put Jews under diplomatic protection.
And was this his invention as well?
His invention. And I think this is, we can say with certainty, and we can also say with certainty that it was then adopted by other diplomats.
Over time, though, only one site offered any real measure of protection, an old glass factory that Karl Lutz declared Swiss property. In December of 1944, Andrew Simon showed up at the door of what became known as the Glass House with his mother.
We were shunted into the basement where there were tons of people, and we were given an area of the floor near the wall. I would guess it to be about 3 meters square, where we could sit on the floor and be there.
Mate, not yet a year old, also arrived with his mother, joining the 2,000 or so others inside.
There were multiple the number of people that it could possibly accommodate. You imagine toilet facilities were completely overwhelmed. There was feces and urine on the floor. Food was very uncertain, a lot of disease.
Still, it was safe, at least until one night around New Year's Eve.
The Nazis just barged in and told everybody to get out, guns and the whole thing. All of us, and there were at least 1,000 people in there, young and old and kids and everything. We had to line up on the sidewalk, 3 abreast, holding the hands up. And we were standing there for 3 hours. And what I know now, but we didn't know then, is that we were about to be marched to the Danube, to be shot in, because they had no trains, they had no other way of getting rid of us.
That is when Karl Lutz arrived on the scene, the Swiss flag fluttering from his car. What happened next was extraordinary.
Karl Lutz came down there and started telling these people, first of all, this is Swiss territory, and they threatened them. I don't know what the hell they did or what they said, but anyway, it made them give up, and they let us go back in.
But safety wasn't enough for Gabor Mate's mother. She made a heartbreaking decision for fear of her infant son's health. She gave him to a Christian woman, a passerby she didn't know, asking her to keep him safe.
So imagine a 25-year-old young woman whose parents had just been murdered, who, for all she knows, her husband is dead, at least has no idea whether he's dead or alive, and now she has to give her baby away, and just what that would take on her part.
He had no superhero's cape, no dashing secret agent's appeal, but Karl Lutz, bespectacled, quiet diplomat, saved the lives of these two boys.
We think of the trauma as being those events.
Mate reunited with his mother after Soviet troops liberated the glass house. With his father, they eventually made it to Canada, where Mate, a doctor, has become a leading expert on childhood trauma and its impact. And Andrew Simon now celebrates his faith with family in Canada. He retired after a long career with the CBC as a journalist and producer. Neither knew Karl Lutz's role in saving their lives until recently. This is what they wish they could say to him now.
And I thank you for my own life and my parents' life and all the thousands of Jews that you saved.
I can't imagine how in those dire circumstances you could possibly come up with any plan whatsoever to save large numbers of people.
Why was Lutz so little known for so long? Why do we know so much more of Raoul Wallenberg and Oskar Schindler?
Here is the quintessential Swiss bureaucrat. Nobody knows about him. He's in the background, and he's able to accomplish something that is truly astounding and extraordinary.
Instead of being celebrated by the Swiss, Lutz was reprimanded for overstepping his boundaries when he returned home. Only recently was he formally recognized by Switzerland for his role.
And so I think you can, hopefully will be inspired what he did. Again, to keep in mind, he was a very, very unlikely hero.
And so historian Charlotte Chalier continues on her mission to tell the story of Karl Lutz, a mission that has awakened something profound within her.
It changed in many ways my life, and I feel in some small way I'm an activist too. I really can tell his story. That one single human being who was not born to be a hero, who said, I can stand up and I can make a difference, that is for me a deeply personal lesson.
As you heard, Karl Lutz shared his strategy with other diplomats. 2 Portuguese officials are credited with saving more than 2,000 lives and arranging visas for those with relatives in Portugal. Angelo Rota, the Pope's envoy to Budapest, joined Lutz's protests against forced deportations. The Vatican let him issue more than 15,000 documents so Jews could pass as converts. And this Spanish diplomat is still remembered in Hungary as the Angel of Budapest for his part in saving about 5,000 lives. Now, earlier this month, Justin Trudeau announced he will issue a formal apology on behalf of Canadians for this country's actions during the war. Canada turned away a ship carrying 907 German Jews seeking refuge. That decision is blamed for 254 deaths in the Holocaust.
Meanwhile, in Alberta, Rachel Notley offered an apology of her own today to the families and survivors of the 60s scoop. Thousands of First Nations and Métis children were ripped from their families and placed in the care of non-Indigenous people. It was a dark era in Canadian history, and continues to be a source of trauma for Indigenous communities, something Notley acknowledged today.
We are sorry for the loss of families, of stability, of love. We are sorry for the loss of identity, of language and culture. We are sorry for the loneliness, the anger, the confusion, and the frustration. We are sorry for the government practice that left you, Indigenous people, estranged from your families and your communities and your history. We are sorry for this trauma, this pain, this suffering, alienation, and sadness. We are sorry. To all of you, I am sorry.
A story by the celebrity tabloid site TMZ has royal watchers around the world buzzing about a royal honeymoon. The unconfirmed report says Prince Harry and Meghan Markle will stay at a luxury cabin here in Canada at Jasper National Park. It is known as the Royal Retreat, and rents, get ready for this, for upwards of $8,800 a night. Now, it might be just a rumor, but as Rafi Boudjikanian found out, people in Jasper are certainly ready to play host.
In Jasper, the fun starts before you get to Jasper, looking for wildlife on the side of the highway.
We saw yesterday a bear, a black bear.
But visitors may soon have another site to set their eyes on. The royal couple could be honeymooning here. It's got the town buzzing and other media puzzled. This outlet calling their chosen spot the world's most boring place.
I'm not sure who's qualified to call this boring, but I tend to be able to go to places where maybe a bright light city is interesting for me for the first 15-20 minutes.
Scott Eady works in the travel industry.
We've got whitewater rafting here, we've got rock climbing, we've got a hiking assist up the tramway.
Todd Noble would know. He runs the SkyTram, propelling visitors from ground level to the top of the Rocky Mountains in minutes.
There are a lot of high-profile people that come through Jasper. It's known to be quite a pristine and laid-back community that everyone, you, me, anyone, can get a nice, relaxing holiday out of it.
This stargazing expert says he's been noticing unusual activity by night, more helicopters buzzing overhead than he's used to. Perhaps a sign of imminent arrival by eminent personalities.
If they were coming here, it's something that we, of course, couldn't talk about, but what's more romantic than an evening under the stars and an evening in the Canadian Rockies?
This designer clothing store gushing at the possibility of serving Meghan Markle.
I would obviously be thrilled to have her in the store. Being a celebrity with some connections to Canada, it's always wonderful to have someone like that in the shop.
Of course, for now, everyone here may be getting a little too excited, with the town's tourism board saying the Royals have not booked accommodations anywhere yet. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Jasper, Alberta.
So there is a reason why the cabin the newlyweds are said to be considering is called the Royal Retreat. It has a long association with Canada's kings and queens.
Into the majestic splendor of the Rocky Mountains winds the long train on its westward journey.
George VI and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mum, stayed in the lodge in 1939. Their cross-Canada tour was the first time a reigning monarch had set foot in this country. Now jump ahead several decades to 2000. That's when the impressive lodge was destroyed by fire. It was rebuilt right away, just in time for Prince Harry's grandparents, the Queen and Prince Philip, to stay there in 2005. That visit was in celebration of Alberta's 100th anniversary. So, Ian, let's go back to Stratford now because, as we told you about earlier, the festival's opening night had to be canceled because of a bomb threat.
Adrian, that would be, and it has been disappointing for theater goers and the actors, especially because tonight's opening night kicks off a season that will look a bit different.
The rarer action is in virtue than in vengeance.
Christopher Plummer playing the character Prospero in The Tempest at the Stratford Festival a few years back. Stratford is the largest classical repertory theatre in North America, attracting 500,000 people to the small Ontario city each year. With the rise of the Me Too and Time's Up movements, a lot more attention is being paid to gender parity in the arts. So, in an effort to stay relevant, the Prospero of 2018 has a feminine twist. Stephanie Skandaris has a preview.
I'll break my staff, bury it certain fathoms in the earth.
After 43 years at the Stratford Festival, Martha Henry is still breaking new ground. She's playing Prospero in The Tempest as a woman, a concept she initially rejected.
I thought, no. No, I couldn't do that. No. Shakespeare wrote men and Shakespeare wrote women. Come away, servant, come. I'm ready now.
But as Henry studied the text, she says she discovered a feminine energy to Prospero, something she hadn't noticed back in 1962 when she made her Stratford debut playing Prospero's daughter, Miranda, opposite William Hunt. Now at age 80, Henry's the one in the lead. She says in a classical company, that's rare.
Can you imagine that Shakespeare didn't write any parts for women my age? So I kind of thought, well, that's it for me. That's the end of my acting career. And then Anthony came up with this idea.
Today, I went back in time to one of the early rehearsals we did.
That would be Anthony Cimolino, director of The Tempest and artistic director of the whole festival.
Some of the very, very finest, I'd say more than 50% of our finest actors are female. There, I've said it. And now they get to play the parts they should be playing. What's wrong with that?
My brave spirit.
Cimolino says Henry's casting is one part of a larger theme.
We put together the season this year around the idea of freedom, finding freedom, and it felt to me like gender fluidity and was part of that discussion.
Yes, Christina. But it's hard to know how audiences will respond to another kind of gender bending when a woman plays a man as a man. Shauna McKenna will do that later this season as Julius Caesar.
Who doesn't want to be an emperor?
McKenna says Shakespeare may have written more female roles if women had been allowed on stage in his time.
Now we say, well, you know what? We're allowed to now, so let's take up some space. I think we're just blurring the edges of gender. I think we're saying these are roles and characters first. Maybe gender is secondary.
Which characters? Playing with gender roles also means altering costumes to fit a woman's body, something director Kira Loughran tackled for The Comedy of Errors.
We looked at having the Duke, who runs the place and is in charge, being played by a man, but in a costume that sort of accentuates a feminine form. You can see it's a very sexy skirt.
The entire play takes place in a completely gender-fluid world, and Loughran says it's okay if audience members leave the theater with questions.
Especially when we're in such a diverse community. Not everyone will like it, but if you can have a good conversation about it, and if it can make you, like, challenge the way you think in a way that's open and curious, that's how culture, I think, grows.
And hopefully, she says, all the shows are an entertaining ride along the way. Stephanie Skandaris, CBC News, Stratford, Ontario.
So we were talking about that bomb threat tonight in Stratford that has delayed the official opening of The Tempest. The festival's artistic director, Anthony Cimolino, sent out a comforting tweet. Further to tonight's cancellation of The Tempest, we'll provide more information as it becomes available. I'm sitting with Martha Henry, who is holding Prospero's staff. She will work her magic soon.
Still ahead on The National, our moment of the day. We have an update on the hero we told you about yesterday and his encounter with another hero from Mali.
On The National tonight, severe flooding in Maryland that may have turned deadly. A man is missing, and parts of a Baltimore suburb are destroyed after a massive rainstorm yesterday. Police say the missing man, a 39-year-old Air Force veteran, had gone into the water to search for a woman's cat and never resurfaced. And heavy rain from subtropical storm Alberto appears to have turned deadly. 2 journalists in North Carolina were covering the storm when a tree collapsed on their vehicle. They were killed. Alberto made landfall in Florida earlier today, but as it moves inland, it is weakening. Just late tonight, it's been downgraded to a tropical depression.
You remember that amazing video we showed you as our moment yesterday? Mahmoudou Gassama pulling himself up from balcony to save a 4-year-old. His extraordinary feat has been seen by people around the world and has earned him the nickname Spider-Man of the 18th District. Now, for Gassama, an undocumented migrant from Mali, he didn't want to draw attention to himself, but today there was a happy ending, and that is our moment of the day.
Ouais, ça me fait plaisir, parce que c'est ma première fois de gagner un trophée comme ça, voilà.
Mahmoudou Gassama has had a whirlwind 48 hours, and today, in a meeting with the French President Emmanuel Macron, he was awarded a medal for his bravery. He was also promised a fast track to French citizenship, plus a job offer with Paris's fire and emergency service.
Le caractère exceptionnel de ce geste justifiait les décisions exceptionnelles que nous avons prises.
And all the attention has led to a new connection, another man from Mali who was also once hailed a hero. Lassana Bathily was credited with saving the lives of 6 hostages at a Jewish supermarket in Paris. He hid them in a freezer during an attack in January of 2015. He, too, was granted French citizenship back then, but he told us he never felt like a hero.
Après, moi, je dis, je ne suis pas un héros. Aider d'autres personnes, pour moi, ce n'est pas quelque chose qui est nouveau. Nous, on a grandi avec ça.
The two men actually met today. Bathily congratulated Gassama and called him a hero.
L'homme fort, c'est lui le plus fort. Voilà, là, tu vas donner l'avion pour lesquels le cochon va donner ça. Ah ouais.
Okay, so these two certainly have a lot to talk about. Lassana Bathily, by the way, wrote a book. He started a charity, and then in the way the world is odd, just as he was getting his life back together after the trauma, he went for a stroll one night and ended up getting caught in the Bataclan attack in Paris and ended up hiding in a cafe all night long with some of the gravely wounded. And, you know, this is a man who went to France to save his life and ended up nearly losing it twice.
Yeah, life can be strange sometimes. I got to say, I've watched that Gassama video half a dozen times. I get chills every time I see it.
A viral video that may actually lead to change for the good in terms of attitudes. We'll see how that turns out. That is The National for Monday, May 28th. Good night.
Good night.